Okay, good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out the future for smarter buildings. It's really great to have you with us today. So in case you're wondering who we are, our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org. And just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's make this interactive using the Zoom chat. Questions, comments, and anything else that's polite, let's put it that way. And if you want anything from this deck, it is available on mondaylive.org. So this being March, we have been talking about, are we AI ready? We in this context is really we, the industry that's delivering smart buildings. So we've been having a really good conversation on this. And today, after our normal news and trends on the AI readiness, we're really going to be talking about whether we actually have accessible data and whether the data is really AI ready. It's really the sort of focus on that, how to get to it and the readiness of data for AI. So that's the focus. But before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken for an update from Automated Buildings. What's going on, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. Up on the left-hand corner there, I found this little cartoon, and it's kind of great because it kind of shows us going up an escalator above the clouds to the pearly gates and the Enterprise, and then all of a sudden we fall through the clouds and we end up in data heck or maybe even data hell. And I thought it was pretty fun that in a matter of less than 10 or 20 seconds, you could kind of see our whole industry depicted. And that is definitely one of our problems, is trying to get this data straight. We have a summary of our last Monday Live meeting there. How are we AI ready? I think that turned out pretty well. The thing that's happening here too is I'm noticing is the communities that you are part of shape you. And I was reminded of that in one of my mentors posted something, and we were back in the 70s talking about back then in the early 70s, I had a lot of mentors that were in the computer simulation industry, and that's where I was as well, data analytics and energy simulation. And they shaped me, and we all would do simulations and we'd get together and we'd talk about it. We'd talk real funny. And then in 1975, we kind of a lot of us transitioned. Some new people came to the groups, and we sort of invented DDC, and that was kind of fun too. But those communities, and then I started thinking about it. Those communities waved through all my life. There was always then we were in the community of actually bringing this stuff into a cost level that it could be everywhere and be the de facto standard. And then we went through running into the internet. But anyway, the bottom line is the communities we are part of shape us. There's no doubt about that. And the interesting thing is this integrated quest for human quality is interesting. It's the top post on our site. And actually the code people are working with these folks, but they're actually creating, I would call like campuses in the major cities. And it's for people with like thought. And the thing that intrigues me is we've always seen our buildings as static things with walls and stuff. But as we trowel this virtual material on it, and the AIs and IBBs and all kinds of things like that, the buildings are less restrictive in their size. And what we're really striving to get to is that community. And I think that's the gist I got out of this, is these guys are building communities which folks can, if they want office space, they can connect to. But more than that, just to have a presence and a place where everybody's doing that. So anyway, that was interesting. The other thing we've done below that is becoming agentic AI ready. That was last month. And what happened is I usually do all these links and stuff. So what happens is we move on and we make up a new slide for the next month, but the actual old slide is lost. So I've started to just copy those over and put them on automated buildings. That's my big bug with social media is it's so time sensitive. And then when you try and find something later, it's sometimes very difficult to find. We've got a great article from Kimon on we're still buying software like it came in boxes, and we've got to change our thought. The way AI brings software to us and brings products to us, it doesn't bring them in shells, it brings them in pieces, and it brings the actual function that we want out of them. And it's sort of a head shake to get your mind around that, to stop thinking about that you're actually buying a box with software in it, or you're buying a person who has a definable product. What we're seeing is more of a mosaic, a moving mosaic that's kind of coming towards us. Another post we had over there in the black and white is the Open Infrastructure Foundation. They're working with OpenStack framework and the Linux Foundation. So as C4SB is working with Linux, there's a whole bunch of other people, which excites me as well. So there's a bunch of things coming together there. So that's an interesting post if you want to click on it and go see what it's about. The bottom one is BACnet. And who knew this thing that Jim created would turn into, look at all the bits and pieces that BACnet reaches out and bites. But there's a new thing on the street for approval with a standard, I guess. Basically, they're updating the standard. And if you click on that, it shows you all of the new thing. They even had a great word for it, back something, which I forget. You have to click on it to find out. Anyway, that's about it. Back to you, Anto.
Before you leave the slide, Anto, that becoming an agentic AI ready. If you guys hadn't seen it, have a look at what's his name, the Jensen Huang's keynote at GTC. There's a great slide and introduction about how you get to agentic AI ready stuff. It's out there now. It's like a 2-hour keynote from what NVIDIA is doing. He's the CEO of NVIDIA, if you know him. I'll post a link in the YouTube. It's kind of cool. But he gives you a really good background of where we are on the roadmap and where we're going, and where the next step is in agentic AI.
Super. Thanks for that.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Ken. The link board as always. Any other perspectives that anybody want to share before we move on? Hearing none, we shall move on. Talking about are we AI ready again? So in the first week of March, we talked about really being what being AI ready was all about, and a lot of that.
Paying me $63,000 a month. Well,
that was you, Ken. I'm muting you.
I'm sorry, I fixed it. I was peeking. Okay. You caught me.
Yeah, so we talked about what being AI ready was all about. That was the first week, which is an interesting conversation. We're obviously continuing on that because the data piece is a central part of that. And then we spent a week talking about the value of having buildings that are AI ready, comparing the ones that are not versus the ones that are. That was an interesting conversation. And last week we were talking about the workforce, the AI readiness of the workforce. So that was great. So now the question is our data accessible and AI ready? Because we're putting in an awful lot of resources and thoughts of creating this AI and all of these robots, and I think the last thing that we want is that we don't want them to have nothing to do. So that's my fun graphic of today. We don't want bored AI. So I was actually talking with Glen Allmendinger late last week, and we were chatting about various things. And I started talking about this week, what we're planning to do on Monday this week, about focusing on the conversation about data. And then he started telling me about some of the stuff that he's doing at the Smarter Summit. He was telling us about this critical mission studio that he's embarking on. And he was telling me that basically that in that work, it's actually a very similar set of questions that they're starting to ask about AI and about accessing data. So I thought he could come and join us and have that conversation here with us. So I have brought him on to be a panelist. I'm going to stop the share. And as soon as Glenn is on, we can have a conversation with him. Glenn,
Claire,
good afternoon.
good afternoon, everybody.
I think Glenn does not need an introduction to this group. Data, getting data, accessing data. You were telling me some of the sort of the quests that you're embarking on in terms of the sort of the critical mission studio that you're doing, and the sort of the investment thesis you're starting to put together. Can you speak to that and speak to how that all relates to the question of getting at the data?
Yeah, well, obviously data, lots of people have lots of different characterizations about its value and all of this. I always ask, everybody tells me how valuable all this data will be. My usual question is, can you get to it? Can you do anything with it? And I would say, if I just back up a half a step and sort of set a broader context, the forces we see at work on any of these kinds of more mission critical spaces, like buildings, and so whether they're data centers or hospitals or just large commercial office towers or whatever, and we see this across other domains, obviously, as well, in manufacturing and supply chain and transportation systems and so forth. But to me, there's a confluence of forces at work. One is, I think cybersecurity, probably as much as anything, is scaring people finally, and I think people are much more exposed to understanding that there's a lot of risk in operational technology, OT systems, and that the level of complexity that has risen in OT over the years in any of these kinds of applications it's gotten pretty high and probably unmanageable. So when you combine OT complexity with either AI readiness or the fear of cybersecurity risks and exposure, all of these roads eventually lead back to the use of data across these systems, obviously in a more interoperable fashion. And I'm kind of interested in hearing people's reactions to this, which is, I mean, just a couple of very basic questions. Is the data even available? How difficult is it to make available? We've been joking for the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years that more than half the data that any business, like any supplier of systems in this building space, for example, more than half the data they would require to operate and do the things that they would want to do with AI and other more advanced tools, is other people's data. It's not necessarily their data. And so when you think about data usage, data accessibility, data management, and then really data integration across disparate and heterogeneous systems, my first purposely naive question is, how far do people think people have come with this in the building space? It's always really hard to tell from the macro trend down to the street level what really goes on. And if it in fact, how available it is, are the tools there and readily accessible for people to essentially manage that data, curate it, organize it, reuse it, and How far along are we just from a maturity standpoint? And probably the footnote here would be, what are the biggest pain points that drive this? Because I think we're going through an exercise right now in the industrial space, for example, with a company that we're looking at funding that's organizing data just around the design of the systems that run processes in manufacturing plants. And I'd have to say the feedback from customers has been pretty horrifying in terms of how disorganized and fragmented and what a mess they're trying to get their arms around. Any thoughts or reactions from people?
I think, Glenn, on the cybersecurity aspect, that's an interesting one. And obviously, from what we do, cyber is one of our biggest challenges always. There are some interesting companies, initiatives starting on who are using actually AI as part of their cybersecurity platforms, which is really interesting, right? So they're actually embracing it because it's such a complex space that it's quickly getting outside the realms of, having to have, a lot of cyber IT guys on staff. And we do, of course. I have a whole, cyber team and an organization, but even they are stretched thin trying to keep ahead of the curve of what's happening out there. And so there's a lot of embracement now of AI technology within the cyber infrastructure world. How to use AI in cyber to understand what's going on and what onslaught you're getting on your systems. So something we're kind of looking at. It's quite an interesting space.
I've heard quite a bit of feedback recently about using AI to replace, well, really to amplify the value of the people who do know what they're doing. So whether they're directly employed or third parties or otherwise, the idea is, I give them, agents and multi-agent systems and tools to essentially fake being the person that actually understands how all stuff is all supposed to work.
So Glenn, I think that, from my perspective in the industry, we've come a long way in terms of getting data out of our systems. And there are a number of companies out there that do a lot with that data. However, the silo to silo data is still very hard for us to get. And it's not as much a technical problem as it is a political one.
Right.
And so we've been, as a team, casting about as to how we can continue to improve the technical problem. And I think we have a lot of interesting ideas. Anto hopefully can tell us somewhat about a number of the ideas that are underway for looking at ontologies and how we can bring this together. But it's really piercing the political nature of data at the customer. So the environmental health and safety people are not happily sharing their data with the HVAC people and vice versa, and don't seem to know how. And we could take that in any direction, including accounting, etc. Comments?
Not surprising.
Right.
Depressing, but not surprising.
From my perspective, there's a big difference between getting data and assuming a command control, advanced supervisory control position. Okay, so let's take a well-known technology, fault detection. That's been around for 20 years. We got, first of all, the first point I'll make is that we've got enough data to feed those systems. AI is probably even less data intensive than fault detection and diagnostics. So at least they're on par, right? So we never asked this question when we were about to engage with fault detection. So I don't see it as a data sufficiency problem. Having said that, it is a problem because now we're assuming you can't assume and you can't implement an advanced supervisory control system with a SQL data dump like you can with SkySpark, et cetera. I mean, I can't tell you how many clunky 70% of all SkySpark and FDD implementations are 24 hours old. because they're waiting for the trended data dump from the antiquated control system. So yes, there is a technology barrier, but I think we've come a long way in solving that through our software gateway technology, because now we're taking control of the assets, high resolution, high rate of command and control.
Interesting.
So the discussion thus far has been around building systems. And when we look at the industry writ large, there are lots of other real estate data that is absolutely crucial to making money. And one of the key things that's always emphasized about can you leverage AI is the data available, which is what we're talking about, but more formally, is the data in a structured format where it can actually be used and the results be trustworthy. And this is where the trustworthiness of data, it needs to be, in essence, cleansed and
Right.
checked before it can be put into the machine to give you insight. And most real estate, I'm making broad generalizations, of course, there are exceptions. I'd love to find them, but I hope they're out there. But where is the leases? Lease data is all in PDFs and or even scans of documents. And the terms, the dependencies, the risk, that's what an asset manager is concerned about. Is
Right.
if this anchor tenant leaves, that could blow 60 to 70% of the other leases for the mall or whatever it is. And so is this data in a usable structured format? Typically no. And then you have an asset manager that technically owns the building, say some real estate investment fund. And then you have a property manager who may or may not really care about the building, but is really just looking to keep tabs on the building so the other part of their company can be the broker to lease out that space. And then you have facility management folks and a lot of the building whisperers, I think is Jim's term, we've talked about that. The building engineers who have been there for 30 years, they're retiring and their institutional knowledge is going with them and it's not documented anywhere. So with this as the lay of the land for a lot of commercial real estate, the challenges abound in leveraging structured data and AI tools. However, the opportunity to outperform the market, if you can pull it off, is tremendous. And there's structured data opportunities in each one of those areas. Going in reverse order with facility management and ticketing and alarms and everything Keith mentioned and Jim mentioned, there's that whole world of optimization. But then there's another layer above that of facility management and managing more assets with fewer staff because there simply aren't any. And then there's the property management and caring for the tenants and tenant relationships and amenity spaces and utilization and optimization. And then, and I would put parking in there too, and other things that are other sources of revenue for the asset. And then there's the asset management side of things, tracking property taxes, insurance. Those are the big drivers outside of are we leased up? And with the property taxes, what are the comps? Are our neighbors paying more property tax than we are? What's our current appraisal? What's going, where can we get where do we see our our numbers coming down for property taxes or our competitors' numbers coming up. So we're more fair competition and they have to charge what we charge. And then with insurance, this actually is a loop back to the facility managers, because the more and better data you have about the asset, theoretically, the lower the risk it is for the insurers. Of course, taking acts of God out of the equation, that's location-based and microclimate-based. But the more data you have about the asset, theoretically, the better you can leverage your insurance term. So I would group this into those three areas: facility management, property management, and asset management. And I would actually say, in many ways, facility management has more structured data than the other two.
So yeah, I want to echo you, David.
So Anno, please dive in, because
Yeah, what you said there, I mean, that's obviously what we live and breathe, right? And to your point, that whole spectrum is absolutely true. And for all of us who in our space who think our data is bad quality, to your point, David, and you just don't want to see the quality of the data that we have and all the other aspects, right? I mean, lease documents that you say that PDF is probably a luxury, to be honest. You know, it's probably handwritten notes on a who knows what. But so yeah, so the whole spectrum does absolutely exist. The quality of the data is as poor as it is everywhere else as it is with us, right? So data is not, there is no one's got, you know, magical clean data. And, you know, and obviously a lot of it is just time, right? Over time, buildings change hands, go through changes in lease and tenants and upgrades and all that sort of stuff. It's not trivial tracking all that historical stuff, you know, just through a lifetime of a building as you go. So yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. And we don't actually see it as buckets, to be honest, David. We see it as a continuum spectrum, you know, from one end to the other end, and it all has, and all of it has to intersect, which brings another whole conundrum of what is an asset in a building, which is a really interesting conversation to have in any REIT. You know, you can ask 100 people in a REIT what an asset is, and you'll get 100 different answers, which is also another thing. So the definition of an asset is vague and nefarious. And then to your other point, what we also see is AI. If you take again the where we are in the timelines of stuff, and if you go and look at NVIDIA's video, which is kind of fun, people have got different. There are different stages within that timeline growth as well, right? In fact, it was interesting this week. I was on I watched a conference call on, what was it called? Hey, how AI and LLMs are driving commercial value in CRE, commercial real estate. It was kind of an interesting panel-based sort of discussion. But what struck me was they talked mainly about a very primitive AI models for CRE. They were talking about we're in the world of chatbots, right? You can feed your PDFs into the chat GPT, and then you can go ask chat GPT a whole bunch of questions about your lease agreement or, you know, whatever else, which is, you know, things we did in the timeline of AI. That was a decade ago, being last year, basically. Versus the thing that I thought was interesting, we are looking more at how you use AI in the operational aspect of stuff. And that's two different sides of the spectrum, right? It's one thing to feed a whole bunch of PDFs in and do some analysis of your lease analysis and all that sort of stuff. It's at the other end of the spectrum where we are is a lot more about how do you use AI and LLMs, and Keith knows this one really, really well, right? He's deep in the bowels of this one. How do you use AI for the operationalization of the business, which is different to asking it, should I move? You know.
So if I could jump in there, that's actually where I'm focusing a lot of my energy now, is creating or updating an asset, meaning a building, to be actually fully AI ready. And so this is a question of, do you have the data you need? And so when you look at, let's take a curtain wall, no. Let's take a concrete slab. So something that has no BMS stuff happening. You may have some seismic sensors if you're in a seismic zone, right? But let's take a two-way 8-inch concrete slab. And what's crazy is that in the development process, if you have that assembly in Revit or Tekla, it can automatically spit out a quantity takeoff of exactly how many yards of concrete you need down to 4 decimal places. And then if you have a good structural engineer, you can know exactly how much rebar is in that, which displaces more concrete. So it's actually that same concrete covers more square feet. So 1 yard of concrete with an 8-inch slab is around 41 square feet. With the rebar in it, it's actually an extra square foot. So when you do these calcs with the assemblies and the takeoffs, that's also your opportunity to have the uniformat number for that assembly, to have the embodied carbon for that mix of concrete, to have the warranty data for it, to have, and this is the secret one I love the most, is what's the depreciation schedule for that? And it's 39 years for concrete. But if it was poured, does that depreciation start the minute it sets? Or is it at C of O? And so there are not games, but there are ways to manage this data on a more granular basis where you can actually leverage this data to optimize everything. But you have to have the data tracking requirements in the agreements with all of the participants. And this is the basis of the ISO 19650 BIM standards, is that this exchange information requirements are included in the contracts with the design team, the architects, engineers, and consultants, construction team, the CM, GC, and subs, and for the operations teams. And if you have these requirements for the data in a specific way as an output of their work, if they know it from the beginning, it actually shouldn't cost more. Because if they know to add it in the handful of families, say for all the VAVs or the FCUs and all of that, if it's in from the beginning, you have it as an output of their work instead of trying to do it later. And with that, you have your ESG requirements for manufacturer, model number, XYZ location in the building, and energy or utility consumption. So
Wow.
the path to doing this properly is having the information requirements in the appointment documents and RFPs.
David, I got a quick question for you on, I'm learning a tremendous amount from what you shared here. I think it's really great.
It is.
I'm surprised and puzzled as to why lease management is so far behind the technology curve.
Everything is.
But in
everything.
particular, the fact that when I think of all the ERP systems that have been on the planet now for 20 plus years and how they've evolved, and I don't know all the things that a company like Yardi provides, but why isn't there, a dozen different software modules you can buy for managing your leases?
You're exactly correct. How can a broker justify making almost the same amount in 2 months that a real estate developer made in 4 years building the building? It's arguably the complexity of these leases and all the negotiations and things like that. This is, of course, my hot take, but if you look at the residential side of things, multifamily is going to more and more standardized leases where it's all online, you're ticking the boxes, you're filling in the fields, and the data is standardized, therefore. With commercial real estate, the more like allowances and clawbacks or expansion rights and all of these things actually add needless complexity, because everybody was looking at expansion and then COVID happened and nobody has any contraction rights in their agreement. And so the question is, you know, to me, the direction is absolutely in standardizing commercial leases. And so the data can be standardized, but also to take a lot of the needless complexity out of it. I mean, they're super complex with tenant allowances for fit out, for free, you know, how many months free rent, you can have swing space during the conversion. All of these different nuances go into these complex office leases. And I really foresee that becoming a thing of the past, because people will want less space with no expansion rights and shorter terms.
I think, and answer your question a different way too, Steve. I mean, sure, you're right. There's 100 property lease management applications and software there, but it's really no different to the work order systems, right? There's 100 work order systems. At the end of the day, it's the data that goes into those things. And to David's point, the complexity of the thing, people just get lazy, right? They get a really complex lease agreement. It doesn't have all the necessary fields, so they just get lazy. And what happens, what they end up sticking into that stuff.
Useless, because it's not an accurate representation of what was agreed to.
Right.
Yeah,
Got
you
it.
find Excel
Yeah.
spreadsheets, still the king.
Yeah.
And I have to say, with leases, no one knows typically the actual square feet of the leased space.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Not
because
unusual.
only people have PDFs, and it's like if you want to do a complex you know, shape to do the estimation of the gross floor area, well, is that to BOMA standards? Because that could be to the middle of the wall. Is your lease space to the inside of your space, or to the midpoint of the walls? Or does it include your common areas if you're the only tenant on that floor? So this is where there needs to be much more diligence, because financial underwriters, insurance underwriters, and brokers spend an inordinate amount of their time just trying to get to core truth, like how many square feet is the space?
So Glenn, how's this blowing up your efforts?
It's a really amazing story.
Well, and then that changes with every new build out, right? On that, more walls, less walls, more
Yeah.
common areas, less common areas, more bathrooms, less bathrooms. We go through that in our building all the time with the tenants, and I will say though, on a practical standpoint, I've gotten to a standard number that I use based on outside dimensions as opposed to internal dimensions. And we just use it. If somebody wants to measure it and prove me wrong or different, then we'll deal with it then. And I suspect that's probably a common practice.
Yes, it is. You'd
Yeah.
be surprised how much more square feet people are paying for that they actually don't have access to.
Just to give you even the simplest example we face, when you go, okay, we're property managing this building on the corner of the 1st and 2nd. Okay, what's that building called? What's its address? The number
the
of
legal
entries we
street
get.
address is
What's
different.
the street address?
Yeah.
The number of names that building has, the addresses that it has, you know, what's its legal address? What's its physical address? Where's the service entry address? You know, where's the front door address? Is that called something different? It used to be called this building, but now it's called this building. We can't get rid of the old building name because everybody over, you know, 50 remembers that building name, but no one remembers the new building name. What the building owner calls it versus what the tenant calls it, that's just for the building name. That's the simplest asset that we can possibly look at. So yeah, I mean the quality of the data isn't. But I have to do echo Mike's Bordonaro's comment there. One of the things we do see is that you're not going to structure the data, and AI does a good job, especially LLMs does a good job of helping you structure data for unstructured mess. It has a lot of access to a lot of stuff. So the effort of trying to structure it for AI in our world is pointless. Deal with what you have, right? And let the machines work it out.
Wow.
And I agree with Mike's point that AI can structure data, certainly, but in terms of investment grade decisions, the preference is to have structured data from known sources. You know, of course,
If
if
you can get it, yeah.
If you can get it. Right, right.
So is this the sort of input you were looking for, Glenn?
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to know who's going to how all this gets managed going forward. If I, even if I just limited the question to owner operators of facilities, who's on first? Who inherits the orchestration of this insane amount of complexity?
Well, it isn't necessarily an insane amount of complexity if the request and the structure for it is given from the very beginning. And so if a design and construction team follows BIM best practices, there's a common data environment, or CDE, that is supposed to be the repository of all the drawings, models, documentation, and data. Unfortunately, in the US, the use of a CDE is virtually non-existent, as far as I can tell. But
it's one of those. Everybody has their own.
But they're not true CDEs typically, because it's really just a file storage system on the cloud. Right. And it's not actually a CDE, which allows you to access specific data sets and even has APIs and such. And so, and a way of this being done right, I mean, a lot of people are justifiably down on British Rail these days, but as far as revolutionizing how BIM is used for operations and asset management, they set the bar with the British standards in the 2000s. And they have all of these requirements in the contract documents, and then it's all tied to a massive GIS system for managing each route. And it's amazing because every crossing grade, everything, they have all the drawings by the geographical location and all of the data. It's a state of the art that we unfortunately don't consider mostly in the US and in Canada. But this is where the opportunity lies, is to get a CDE out of design and construction and have it be useful in operations. And ideally, that CDE would grow once the building becomes operational, and so think of, we have the two types of data. We have master data, which doesn't change that frequently, maybe once a month or once a year. And then you have transactional data that changes all the time. And that's your energy use. Those are your tickets, things like that. So the master data from the CDE is pretty static. And then your tenants moving in would probably still be considered master data, but the amount they pay for common area maintenance, the amount they pay for utilities, all of that is transactional data that is live during the month. So the transactional data is combined with the master data in the building operations.
But you got to go to Steve's point on the chat though, Dave, about who owns, and this is the problem I was trying to highlight, who owns that central data repository, right? Because
that's my question.
everybody has, and that's kind of what I was saying. Everybody, quote unquote, has their own CD, right? As the we have our own central data repository of a facility. The building owner has his own. The tenant has his own. there's all aspects of it, right? And you would think that the property owner who owns the content and the space, would want to have to own the thing, but there's a real challenge with that, right? And then so it ends up everybody creates their own databases of stuff, right, of assets that are in a place.
Well, think of a 5-year real estate investment fund that bought the building 3.5 years ago, they're going to unload the building in a year.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't give a about any of this information or data. And
in fact, to be clear, the less is better.
Yes, exactly. And also when they go into the transaction, they want nothing in there. Everything's fine, and this is where they justifiably want to avoid this level of detail of information.
Well, and again, the example is if anyone who's bought or sold a house, right, and the house is not very complex, you bring somebody in, you can do inspections, you make a detailed list of everything, so you know what your liabilities and what. Imagine doing that at the scale of a commercial building. No one wants to do that,
Right.
But at the same time, if you're managing that asset well, it's easy. Here's all of our records for the last year. And here's all of our service tickets. And here's our capital plan for the next year. And, the analogy that's used frequently is, you're buying a vintage car. The guy who rocks up and says, here are the keys. I did an oil change, I think maybe a year ago. Brakes, I don't know. Tires, maybe 3. Or the other guy rocks up and he has 4 3-ring binders of every oil change and everything. The guy with all the details is going to get a better price for the same car.
Fair. So Anto, how does your ontology story play into all of this?
Boy,
Sorry, too sweeping.
yeah, one of the dimensions of complexity that we see is this sort of that we've been talking about is the multiple silos, multiple domains. And really, when we start talking about ontologies, we're really starting to say that not only are there multiple silos and multiple domains, they have their own ontologies, and it is completely different to mine, whoever mine is and whoever you are.
Right.
So if you're in an industry somewhere, you're in a domain, right? You know your ontology, even if you didn't know the word ontology, you know things, right? You know how to do so, right? And all of the data, therefore, is based on that ontology. Right. So I think somebody said it right at the beginning of this call is that I think the big realization is that to do what we need to do, the data that we need is actually not our data. It's actually somebody else's data.
Right.
And what's interesting is everybody says that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah, it's everybody else's fault. Everybody says.
And again, that's my example of just take the simplest thing, the building name and location, right, where it is. What I call it is totally different to what you call it. What the address that I use is different to you. And again, we're talking about the same piece of asset at the end of the day.
Right.
Wow.
But the efforts that are happening,
that's at the building level.
the efforts that are happening in every silo are similar in getting their act or their awareness of the poor state of affairs relative to ontologies, semantic normalization. And some of these are really big words that I'm just now starting to figure out. But every silo is realizing that they can't use AI either because their data is just as messed up as what David's describing real estate data is. My son that's the line of work my son is in right now, is he's studying contract documents and digitizing of contract documents. And you should hear the stories he tells about the poor state of affairs. But every domain is getting their act together because they're realizing they have to. And so, but what we're doing with the ontology normalization and the Tiger team that's going to be announced any day now, is bringing together the industry around, let's get our act together around normalizing the ontologies and the semantics so that we can either serve as a model for other industries or at least make our data more easily accessible and more commonly understood, so that maybe the data from our systems can actually be monetized to those other systems, making our data more available to everybody else. But that effort, and we've had some really good calls in the last last few hours about bringing together that semantic normalization and ontology Tiger team. But I think we can be.
Once you sort of realize this about the ontologies, that every domain's ontology is different and they're never ever going to change, right? And you can't have a big Uber ontology about everything, but that just doesn't work, right? So you have to have some way of translating or mapping these things together somehow. Right. And that piece that Jim was mentioning earlier that I published on LinkedIn is actually about that. It's about the fact that we have to recognize that ontologies are out there. We can't change them all because it doesn't make sense to do that, because they're stable generally in their domain. So we have to figure out a way of making them all work with each other. And that's the challenge.
Well, they're stable, but they do need to become better organized and better described as well. And that's what we're doing inside our domain is trying to normalize and figure out how to better describe them. Because everybody made up their own damn ontology because they were making up their own app, and so that made sense. Everybody
and
in there.
Brian Turner's.
Is he on?
The time machine. Yeah, he's on, and he's obviously remembering the days, presumably before the start of the ontology alignment project, right?
Yeah, which we're going to be bringing together. Brian, stand by for a phone call.
I would just make the general comment that given the rate of change in the building space, ownership and property managers and just layers and layers of different constituents, I would have to say I'd be hard pressed to figure out a more complex environment to try and solve all this in. I mean, if I go to industrial or manufacturing, I mean, yes. You're dealing in an enterprise where they can dictate control of things and tell people to go do things, and they may not be the smartest guys in the block, but they have fewer actors in play doing things independently or autonomously. Where here it sounds like unification of accessibility and usage and sharing and so forth of data is hugely impacted by lots of different autonomous and semi-autonomous actors in the way that this stuff gets managed.
I feel we're limiting ourselves with the engagement of AI because we're still trying to frame it within the lens of understanding of a human being. So we're talking about things that are easy for AI to solve are impossible for humans, and things that are easy for humans are impossible sometimes for AI.
Right.
It's not about the ontology. It's about what, if I've learned anything from being in the AI field, and I've been in this for more than 20 years. I didn't just start when ChatGPT came out. I mean, let's do a thought experiment real quick. Has anybody ever thought about why we turn energy flow and transfer in tons? And why we talk about lift and chillers? It's because it's a physical measurement of the weight of the energy. So if you ask ChatGPT this question, how much in tons does the energy weigh, the weight of energy transfer or rejection process to reduce water flowing through a chiller at the rate of 1800 GPM, 6 degrees Fahrenheit, from 77 degrees down to 71 degrees, with an outside air wet bulb temperature of 82.6 degrees at sea level in the middle of a typical July summer in Los Angeles, California. No building control system could answer that. And the answer, by the way, is 450 tons. And that's how our AI saves energy, because it can answer questions like that.
Right, right.
And I'd be glad to pass that question along. And that's just spitballing.
But I think that's kind of where, if you sum it all out, back to David's, like within the building space, and again where I live, it's a whole spectrum. And I think one of the things we've got to recognize is there's no one AI for that whole spectrum, right? Everyone's looking for different answers and different solutions, right? What kids doing at the chiller level is totally different requirement for what the guy who's running the lease management system, right, we're trying to do lease analysis.
Yeah, it's not generative or predictive.
Right, exactly. And again, that's why it's worth having a look at NVIDIA's video. There's a spectrum here, and there are solutions across that spectrum. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a given, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, we can barely keep up with the psychometric chart, for God's sake. I mean, we can never answer these questions. Like, they're just too complex.
That's a really good test, actually, by the way. There's one test that I actually ask now. Have you ever seen a psychometric chart? Do you know what a psychometric chart is? That's a really fun one internally.
Yeah. I remember when Cisco was getting into the building control space, and different companies were going back and forth. There was literally the same fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Some person at a conference 20 years ago put up a psychometric chart, and it's like, ooh, you don't want to mess with this stuff. This is complex. Only us, building control people can deal with that.
Right.
It's the same thing with AI. I'm serious. We're like savages with fire at this point.
Yeah.
Very
Just
true.
reading Mike's comment to everyone.
Well, Anto, I don't know, obviously we haven't solved anything, but this is extremely helpful, I have to say. I mean, spheres and the subdomains that data lives in, the differences, the fact that you do have less control over how, all the different constituents are trying to organize all of this, and there are means that many of these new tools can address, but it's not an instant overnight sensation by any stretch of the imagination.
But we've sort of concluded that the problem is that it's everyone's data, everybody else's data is not ready. Our data's fine, right? That's what we all conclude.
Right. My data's okay. My kids are
right? It's your problem, whoever you are.
Of course, this is a human conditional thing. Pass the buck.
There you go.
Well, thank you.
So
for
maybe
all
we
that
should leave it
feedback.
there for
Yeah,
this
we can
week.
leave it there for now, but more questions in the future. But thanks everybody. That was extremely helpful.
Thank you, Glenn, for being part of this, and we are going to continue this
Yes,
next week for one more week before we move on to a new subject, and maybe we talk about ontologies. Who knows? In
Good.
April.
All right. Well, I'll come join next week and hear the rest of this then. That's great.
Okay.
All right.
So let's wrap it there. Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.